Perfect. Well, welcome everyone to another session of our mentorship program for the spring semester. Today's topic is going to be sitting for the CPA exam. So we have three panelists today, two of whom should look very familiar. Our first is Mary Anderson, CPA. Mary just got licensed last year and a half?
Oh, April of this year.
Oh, April of this year. Okay.
Yeah.
We also have Julie Sigeti. Sigeti, and you, I think if I remember correctly, you got licensed at the end of 2019?
Beginning of 2020. I finished end of
okay.
2019, and then it took a couple months
and
to
got
process the paperwork. Yeah.
Perfect. And then last but not least, we have Kim Holland from Becker, who so graciously joins us, dialing in from Dallas. Kim, appreciate you hopping on.
Thank you for having me.
Cool. So I think everyone knows how things go. I'll have some starter questions to get started. But again, especially on a topic as interesting as the CPA exam, there's a lot to talk about. So feel free, use the chat to post any questions that you have. And yeah, hopefully we'll have a good time. So let me go ahead and get started. We have our very first starter question here. So we'll start with Mary. We'll go ahead and we'll start with you on this one.
Okay.
Okay. So let me just pull up my questions real quick. Okay. So from what you have seen, your own personal experience or kind of heard from others, what section of the CPA exam is the hardest and why?
Well, FAR was definitely the hardest because of all the topics it covered. And then I'd say I was surprised to discover that BEC was also hard. I think with BEC, it was just the contract information, all the contract knowledge. And so those two were surprisingly pretty hard. And I thought the easiest for me was audit. And I think that's just because I love auditing and I'm an audit associate. And surprisingly, tax came pretty easily too. So if I had to put it in order, it would be FAR, BEC, and then probably reg, and then audit.
Oh, very cool. Julie, what about you?
I would agree with BEC. It's kind of like the silent test of everyone thinks it's super easy because when you start your review program, you get all the books and FAR is like this big and reg is like this big and audit is like this big and then BEC is like this big. So they think it's going to be super easy because there's not a lot of material, but it turns out being one of the hardest for people to pass because of the variety of information, and it's changing quite a bit of what's been inside of it.
And Kim, coming from Becker, what have you heard that folks, what section do they tend to struggle with the most?
Well, I'll say first, if I had a quarter for every time a student let me know they underestimated BEC, I could be retired already. And it's definitely for the reasons that have already been mentioned. There are people who will talk about how easy BEC is because it doesn't really go too deep into any subject matters. But as Julie just mentioned, there's a wide variety of subject matter. And especially if you aren't a recent student, if you've been out of school for a year or more, studying such a variety of topics all at the same time, it can be a lot. So BEC is definitely something that can be a challenge. So don't underestimate it. Just because it's not going to be as time consuming doesn't mean you still don't need to put in the time, if that makes sense. But as far as the most difficult one, what I hear the most from students is FAR. And similar to BEC, it doesn't go very deep into any one subject, but the amount of content you have to go through in order to be properly prepared for this exam it's a lot. It's incredibly massive. Just to give all of you on the line an idea, if you'll think back to your student mindset, content covered in the FAR section includes Principles 1, Financial Accounting, Intermediate 1, Intermediate 2, Intermediate 3, or Advanced Accounting, and then there's a little bit of governmental nonprofit in there as well. So, we joke with professors about how Intermediate 1 is the filter. There are a lot of people who change their major suddenly after Intermediate 1. So imagine having to study for that plus intermediate 2 all at the same time. It can be overwhelming, but it is incredibly doable. And I would actually recommend you start with that one if possible, because it does cover all of that foundational information from early on in your degree plan.
Definitely. Interesting statistic. I don't have the most recent one because we haven't had the swearing-in ceremony in person for a while. But for the last several years, at least in the state of Texas, they always release like the passing rates and whatnot for the swearing-in ceremonies. Audit has been the one people have had the most trouble with. That one in the state of Texas, it takes, this is as of late 2019, I think, 1.7 attempts for all candidates who pass to pass audit.
Well, that means it's less than 1.7 for all the other sections. Y'all have a good outlook.
Exactly. I think it takes on average, it takes 7 attempts to pass all 4 parts. So if you fail your first 2 sections, you are still ahead of the curve. So keep that in mind. It's a difficult exam, but it's very rewarding when you're done. So with that in mind, and Julie, we'll start with you on this. So tell us, you've taken the exam pretty recently. Tell us a little bit about your experience.
My experience with taking the exam. So I graduated May 2019. I took a month off from graduating, doing school full time before I started studying. And then when July hit, I was just study all the time that I could. I had started a new job that was nearby where my husband worked. So we carpooled every day, and I would study in the car while he drove me, and I would study in the car while he picked me up. So a lot of my time was just studying, and luckily it paid off for me. I only had to sit for each section once, and I attribute that to when I was in school, I took the attitude of, I'm in school now, I'm studying. I want this to be the time that I'm actually sitting and studying for those exams. I don't want to have to go back and relearn everything. So while it's fresh, while I still have the ability to talk to a teacher or classmates right there, let's get the fundamental understanding done now. So when I go, it is truly just review when I come to the CPA exam.
Perfect. Mary, what about you?
Well, it was a very challenging time. I always joke that my husband was a single father during that time period because of the time commitments, but it is a rewarding experience. You definitely need that support in your life too, to be successful at it. And I took the same attitude with Julie. When I was in school, I was like, I'm going to learn this stuff. I'm going to learn this stuff now. I actually took quite a while to pass my exams. I think I was within almost at that last point where I was going to lose the credit for my first exam unless I passed the last one, which was BEC. Fortunately, I passed all on the first time, thank goodness. And so that part, yeah, it's very rewarding. It's very challenging. It's a huge time commitment. And so, I'm glad I did it, but I probably would not ever do it again. So, if you can, get through it, even if you don't pass the first time, you just got to keep trying, because once you pass one, you can pass all of them.
Exactly. And I know when I was studying, I remember going through the Becker course and Peter Olinto saying, the more miserable you are when you're studying, the better you're probably going to do.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, we're going to pivot over to Kim. Kim, why is it so important to have a CPA review course?
Well, it's important to have a CPA review course because, like I just mentioned with FAR, do you really want to go back and get your Principles 1 accounting textbook, if you even still have it, your Intermediate 1, your Intermediate 2, your Advanced Accounting, and your Governmental Nonprofit texts, if you even have them? Do you really want to go back into those and look at the AICPA blueprints, because they are available, but do you want to be the one to dissect those blueprints and look in your textbooks and decide, this is relevant, this is not, or not? If you do want to do that, then more power to you. But it's already a time-consuming process, even with something like Becker telling you exactly what to study. And time is money. Time is our most valuable resource. So that's why it's important to have a CPA exam prep course. And just based off of what Mary and Julie said, it actually kind of hits home with, we have success coaches at Becker who will talk with students who need some coaching. And I've talked to these coaches and they've said the things that they have to say most often are, know your why. Why are you getting this license? Write it down. One student actually went and got a single business card made that had their name with CPA after it and pinned it to their wall so that they could come back to their why, because it is time consuming. And like Mary said, you don't want to do it again. You won't regret doing it the first time, but you won't want to do it again. So you have to know your why. That's really important. And then the other thing that a lot of people skip is making a study plan. Julie mentioned how quickly after graduation that she started taking the CPA exam. And it's incredibly important because study skills will leave your skill set so quickly once you're not using them. It's actually been statistically proven across the country, regardless of state, regardless of university, that students who take their first exam within 90 days of graduation have the highest pass rates. So having a study plan, having the knowledge and the skill set in order to hold yourself accountable to a study plan, those are going to be the two best things that you can do for yourself. And remember your why.
Definitely. And one thing I want to note, I know we've talked about this in the previous session with the letter of intent. For those of you still in school, make sure to submit that ahead of time, because depending on kind of what path you took and, you know, your own personal situation, I know for me, I had actually taken like an abundance of classes when I was in community college, more so than I needed. So halfway through my graduate semester, I actually had enough credits to start sitting. So I was able to actually sit the summer before my last semester of school. So something to keep in mind. If you are able to start before graduation, like if you happen to find yourself in that situation, don't pass up that opportunity. So we're going to go ahead and, Mary, we'll throw this one to you. What is your best piece of advice for preparing for the exam?
Okay, and I promise Kim did not pay me to say this, but I use Becker, and the one thing I tell everyone is do the practice exam. Sometimes I wouldn't even schedule my exam until I could pass practice exam. I really felt the practice exams were so much like the real exam that's really what prepared me to go in there to take the exam. So yeah, I'm a big fan of Becker. So and their practice exams. So I mean, that is just a good indicator of telling you where you're at, what you need to study, and so I think that helped me a lot.
Definitely. I remember me as a student a number of years ago was at an event, and there was a question brought about the CPA exam, and someone asked like what review course, and a number of the panelists, okay, what did you use? And all 4 panelists plus the moderator all said Becker. Yeah. So that's I mean, it speaks for itself. Julie, how about you? What's your best piece of advice for sitting for the exam?
My best piece of advice is twofold. Get a review course. And once you get to it, actually commit to the study schedule that you've set for yourself and make it non-negotiable. Because I know a lot of people who get the review course and they do the timeline and they set it out, and then life just comes up and they push it further out, and it just becomes something that they'll never get to. So make it a non-negotiable, put it on your calendar. This is something that you cannot be interrupted. When I studied, I didn't have these, but I had headphones on that were purple, really big headphones. So everyone at my house knew if my headphones are on, do not talk to me. I am studying.
Yeah, and cannot stress this enough. Life will happen.
Yeah.
I've never heard in the history of talking to people, colleagues, coworkers, classmates, no one has ever had a perfect study situation. Something will happen at some point where you're studying, however major or minor it might be. Maybe it's okay, I wasn't studying today, but I have a flat tire, so I lose a day of study because I had to go take my car in. It is going to happen, so plan for it. You definitely don't want to be right at the very beginning. Oh, well, if I take one section every 4 months or something, that'll leave me enough time to finish within 18 months. Really plan to finish it within 12 months at the most, so you have that extra time when and if you need it. Kim, how about you? What is your best piece of advice for preparing for the exam?
Well, for new students, something I know a lot of them actually don't realize is available within the software now is our Adapt to You technology, which actually utilizes artificial intelligence to learn from our students what they don't already know. So you can become as proficient as possible in all areas. We have found at Becker that people like to come in and study what they already know. And the things they don't know, I see Julia very smiling. The questions you don't know the answer to, you skip. You skip over those, or you guess and it's not answer and it's wrong, and you just skip it because you don't want to look at those things. And with this software and the proficiency meters that are made available to you, you can really see where, oh, okay, this could potentially be a problem for me. My weakness in this area could potentially keep me from actually passing the exam. Because if you don't have those gauges in front of you, you can maybe not realize how important cost managerial accounting is on BEC and have skipped over those things. So that's my advice to new students is take the time whenever you start the course to learn about the Adapt to You technology and the proficiency measures that are in place for you to utilize, and then actually use them while you're going through the course. Don't spend time studying the things you already know. Focus on the things you don't know that could potentially keep you from passing the exam.
That is fantastic advice. I don't know if Becker is still this way today, but I know when I was going through and studying, when you were going through multiple choice questions, you had two options. You could either see the correct answer after every question, or do all the questions and get all the correct answers at the end. I always told people, do the latter. Wait to see the correct answers at the end. Because if you're doing a set of questions and you're going to get 7 or 8 that are very similar, you're not being honest with yourself. If you missed the first one, you didn't do enough studying, you missed the first one, cheated it, so that's how you do that. And then you get the next 5 right. But really, when you sat down to do those questions at the very beginning, you didn't know how to do those other 5. You kind of had it in the middle, and that's not how it's going to be on the actual exam. The actual exam's not going to kind of give you that ability to cheat, so to speak. So given the option, always wait till the end, do all of your questions, and then go back and review so you have a more realistic picture of, okay, what did I actually know when I sat down to do this?
And something to go off of that is when you're looking at the answers, don't only look at the right answer, see why the other ones were wrong so that you don't fall into the same pitfalls.
Yes, 100 times yes, because a lot, especially you'll see is probably the most on audit. You will not have necessarily one right answer. You will have 3 right answers, and one of those will be the best right answer. So it's kind of like, well, all of these are true, but this is the most true because, and so looking to see why the other ones weren't the best answer, that is going to be very, very important. Okay, I know I talked about like the exam pass rates earlier, but Kim, wondered if you have any other interesting statistics or interesting, it was great to, I really liked what you mentioned about, passing, sitting for the exam within the first 90 days has a higher pass rate. What are some other interesting statistics that the folks at Becker have seen, among folks trying to sit for the exam?
Great. Well, since our software upgrades that we've been making rather consistently since 2018, 2019, one of the things that we've added within the course is an optional CPA exam tracker. This is intended to help ensure that you get your notice to schedule in a timely manner, and also for you to track your scores on the exam, when those scores are going to expire, etc. So it is useful to our students, but it's also useful to Becker because we've actually gone through and analyzed our student success, what successful students are doing, what unsuccessful students are doing. And something we have found, and you must forgive me, I wasn't involved in the data analytics process, and I wouldn't have known what they were talking about even if I was, but I can't tell you the results. So what we found is that students who viewed 80% of their lectures and completed 80% of their homework questions correctly, then took the simulated exams, which were mentioned earlier, and scored a minimum of 50% on each of those exams. Those students passed 94% of their exams taken. So that was an interesting statistic that we found out. We were very interested with it because we expected what the students needed to do. We expected those numbers to be higher, and we expected the number of exams passed to be a little lower. We were not expecting them to work out quite the way they did. So that is something that is a Becker differential, that we do have those statistics. We are paying attention to those things. And another statistic regarding Becker is that over 90% of all Watts-Sells Award winners since 2005 have been Becker CPA Exam Review alumni. And for those of you who don't know what that is, these are the highest scorers on the CPA exam. And what we've started doing with Becker is we've actually started interviewing them and getting more tips and tricks like what's being discussed today on the exam. And I have to say, there aren't very many fun facts about the CPA exam. On average, each section, the pass rate tends to be around 50%. Yeah. Now, coming back to when you're most likely to pass the exam is within 90 days of graduation. That statistic drops just a little bit. It just kind of drops with each passing month that you wait after graduation. It's for the people who wait a year or more after completing their graduation that the pass rate completely plummets and tanks. And that's because these are typically people who are now working full time. They have other responsibilities that are front of mind. They haven't planned any studying or done any studying in over a year. Maybe they're married with a family. Maybe they're traveling a lot for work. And getting back into that student mindset is the biggest challenge they have. Not the content. It's not that they don't know the content. They spent 4 to 6 years studying the content, but it's getting back into that student mindset. So I will emphasize again that one of the best things you can do for yourself is, like Brian already mentioned, send in your application of intent a year to 6 months before you plan to complete your education. That way you can get all discrepancies completed as quickly as possible and start studying for the CPA exam while you're still a student, or at least still can have that student mindset.
Definitely. One thing that I wish I had known, because for me, when I first sat, I was like, okay, I started with reg, thinking, okay, I'm all about tax. I'm going to put my best foot forward with reg, and I was going to go for the Elijah Watts-Sells Award. For those of you that don't know, you need to make a minimum of 95, minimum of 95 in all 4 sections, and I think your average has to be a 95.5. I think that's right, Kim, right? So you have to score very, very high. And I was like, okay, well, I'll start with reg. If I don't make it with reg, there's no way I'm going to make it with any of the other ones. So I ended up getting like a 92 or a 93. So, okay, well, I was off the table for that. So I didn't try quite as hard for the other ones. I did it enough to pass. I was good. Come to find out that in the state of Texas, separately from the Elijah Watts-Sells Award, they have their top 10 scores. So with each window that they award licenses, they take the top 10 and they actually will notate it on your license. So you will have that for life. And I had no idea that was a thing. If I had known, I would have tried a lot harder, because that to me would be so cool to actually have it on your license. Oh, you were, I forget what the languages they use. I think you were an outstanding candidate or something like that. But to me, that was the coolest thing. And I had no idea it was a thing until I got to the swearing-in ceremony. So if you're studying, if you scored really well, you got like a 94 or something, you didn't quite get the Elijah Watts-Sells, don't necessarily let up. If you care about that, there's other people I know, they say all the time that they should give a separate award for people that make the 300 club. That's 475s. That's the perfect amount of efficiency. So cool. All right. We'll go back to Mary for this one. And I know we've touched base on this a little bit. Maybe you can elaborate or focus on a different part. But what would you find most challenging about sitting for the exam?
Well, for sitting for the first exam, because of all the unknowns and just the huge amount of pressure, to think, oh my goodness, I've got 4 of these to do. And so it takes, a special mindset to be like, okay, whatever comes on that day, I can deal with. I'm not going to let, the line getting in or running out of time. Oh my goodness, running out of time. And managing your time during that test. So, and once you can kind of get past the unknowns and that I guess fear of facing and taking your first one, it helps a lot. It helps a lot. So, and then of course the last one too, just so just because then you've got that pressure of, okay, this is the last one. I need to get it out of the way. And if you're on close to your deadline of 1.5 years, then, that pressure is going to be there too. So I think there's the pressure when you're taking the exam. I mean, I think on my 3rd exam, I, maybe showed up late or it just wasn't going well. Something happened to the computer when I went in there. And I was just kind of shocked. I mean, I just kind of like sat there for a little bit and I'm like, okay, you got to get focused. You cannot just sit here and break. This is your one moment to do it. And so it takes a lot of focus to just build up to that day. It takes a lot of studying and planning, but on that day, I mean, that pressure is intense. So, I would say there's that aspect of it too.
Definitely. Julie, what about you?
The first hard part about sitting for the exam is understanding all the different kind of like hoops you have to jump through to actually sit.
Yeah.
They're spelled out, but you don't really understand it until you go through it of, okay, you pay for the notice to schedule, you pay for the eligibility to even schedule the notice to schedule. So just understanding the administration part took a little bit for me. But not necessarily the hardest thing for me, but what I've heard from other people is being able to manage their time during the test.
Mm-hmm.
And just making sure that when you do practice exams that you actually do your best to mimic the environment that you will be in during the testing exam, because you won't be able to get up and move around all the time. You have a 15-minute break during the exam, but other than that, everything else is on the clock. Becker and the other test reviews do a really good job about their multiple choice and simulations or practice exams look to the T, like what you will see inside of the testing center. I don't know how you do that, but you do. So that helps a lot with the kind of like test anxiety of what is it going to be like when I get there? Will I know how to navigate the menus? Understanding how Excel pops up behind the screen and you can get back to it kind of thing. Yeah, just the administrative part was a little hard for me.
That is so nice to hear that y'all have Excel now. I remember when I sat for it on the computer, you had to use like the Windows clunky like default calculator. And I was so used to like having my phone or a physical calculator, I could be quick, but here you had that. And so you'd have to like actually type out the numbers and do it that way. I was so used to the other way. It didn't quite feel right. But yeah, treat each of your exams like on actual exam day. Treat it like an interview. Be ready, be focused. Oh, that's rough, Mark. I can imagine. I can imagine the horror for that.
Oh yeah, it was wild, man. It just went, and
so for the
like people, like one person you could hear was like, it was all dark, so you couldn't see like the person or anything like that. And then the proctor came running into the room and said, "It'll be up in 15 minutes." And everybody, and then it was like, it was like a little bit.
That's a lot. That's a lot of time to lose.
Yeah, but it was up in like 3 or 4 minutes. But it does throw you off like a rhythm. You know what I mean? Like you're kind of, and then you're going over the questions, and then you think to yourself like, well, did they save the answers? Did they not? But so if the power goes out, they save all the questions. I'm sure it's a lot I mean, that was several years ago, so I'm sure it's a lot better now. But do not worry, it's all backed up. That is the least of. Do not cry. I promise it'll be all right. You know what I mean? But, sorry.
Yeah, save the crying for the drive home.
That is correct. That is correct. 100%.
Yep. Like I say, treat exam day, each section, treat it like an interview. So like just like you would for an actual physical interview, know where your exam center is. Go there the day before. See how long it's going to take you to navigate through traffic. Like the check-in process, I would say plan for that to take 15 to 20 minutes. Might not be that long. It kind of depends. Like I know like some of the larger testing centers, like I know people in Dallas, I know like the check-in might take 30 minutes because it's a huge testing center versus like when I took it in San Antonio, it was like a little small, like they had like 15 computers. So there wasn't like a line of people at the door waiting to get checked in. You know, plan, you know, dress in layers, plan for like, you know, whatever the time of year it is. Consider parking. It could be maybe the testing center is somewhere downtown where you have to park in a garage. All those little things like that, you know, may not throw you off as much as the power going out, but can still, to what Mary was saying earlier, if some little thing happens, whatever it is, that can break your concentration. That can, you know, spell kind of bad news for you. So treat it like an. Go ahead.
Oh, and make sure you're familiar with all of the rules. For example, you can't like wear a watch, no jewelry kind of thing, so that when you show up and they say do these things, that you're not flustered about that.
Yep, definitely. Cool. Well, with that, that's all the starter questions we had. Let's take some from the audience, some of our mentees. Do you have any questions for the panel?
Ask away.
Yeah, it can be about whether it's sitting for the exam day, the review courses, you know, maybe more stuff about the letter of intent, what that process is like, anything at all that has to do with the exam. Maybe, you know, and Julie, maybe you can touch base on this a little bit. So you took your last section in 2019, but took you a little bit to actually get the license. I wonder if you wanted to share, because I mean, this is a very real thing that people like don't. You think, oh, I passed the exam, I get to walk out with my CPA in hand. It's not quite that easy.
Yes, I got my passing score on December 24th, or like the 23rd. It was right before Christmas. My last passing score was BEC. And then I took that like 3 hour, is it a 3 hour ethics course? And then I did my ethics exam and I filed my paperwork, and apparently it just took months for them to process it. And I know you can't call yourself a CPA until that's done. So I'm like, I want to tell people that I got this for Christmas, and I couldn't set it out until I finished. So I called the board a few times to make sure that my application was received and getting processed, and they promised me that it was, and it just took longer than I was expecting.
Yeah.
Perfect. Kim, maybe you might be able to touch base on this one. Lauren had a question. Explain a little bit more about the letter of intent.
Sure. So the application of intent, I like to refer to it as the mother may I. You're not actually applying to take the CPA exam yet. You're asking the Texas State Board of Public Accountancy for permission to apply to take the CPA exam. So this application is going to include a transcript evaluation, background check, verification of your legal status, etc. And it takes a significant amount of time for the board to process this application. Typically, it's like 4 to 6 weeks. Depending on when they get your application, it might take less time, but you should plan for it to take more time rather than less. And the reason that it's recommended that you submit the application of intent early is for a few reasons. First of all, we mentioned earlier, you're going to get a list of discrepancies sent to you if you're not eligible to sit for the exam yet. So they'll tell you which of the requirements you've met toward the exam and where you're lacking. You'll also be assigned a representative at the Texas State Board, so you can correspond with that person about those discrepancies and ensure that you'll be on track for eligibility upon graduation at the very latest. So that's one benefit. The other benefit to sending in your application of intent early is that the Texas State Board actually provides a 5th-year scholarship to practically every university in Texas with an accounting program. In order to apply for that 5th-year scholarship, you have to have submitted your application of intent. The last benefit to sending in your application of intent early is all that waiting that I mentioned earlier, it's out of the way. In order to update your account with the board and get eligibility, that's going to move much more quickly. You just have to send in updated transcripts, make it as easy as possible for them. You said I still needed 9 hours in accounting. I took these courses. Here you go. And get them the updated transcripts, and then they can just go check, check, check. You're approved. Now you can submit this other application where you're actually applying for the CPA exam. So that's kind of the application of intent in just the gist of it. I actually emailed you, Brian, a worksheet of the application process in Texas with reference links to the Texas State Board website so that everyone on today's call can actually fill out that worksheet as to when they should expect to complete each of the steps, the 5 key steps to pursuing your CPA license.
Perfect. That's great. Thank you. I'll definitely be sure to distribute that after the call.
Great.
That
Lauren,
sounds really, really good.
I copied you guys on it. So Julie, Mary, if you guys have any colleagues that you need to forward it their way, please feel free to do so.
Perfect. Lauren, did that answer hopefully that answered your question?
Yes, yeah, my dad's a CPA and I was talking to him about the letter of intent and he was like, I have no idea what that is. I didn't have to do that. So then he's kind of been my, reference board for this and navigating so far. So that was one thing he was like, you'll have to ask them about.
Something I will tell you, a little special situation, if you didn't already know. So when you actually receive your license, since he's a CPA, he can actually present you your license like on stage during the ceremony. That's like the coolest thing that the state board does. Usually it's like a parent-child, but I've seen some where it's like a husband and wife, and one of them already has their license, and the next one gets it like a year later, and they actually let you present it to them and take a picture, and it's so cool. Like I'm in San Antonio now, but when I was still living in Austin, every 6 months I would always go to the swearing-in ceremony because like Texas, like hearing people from other states, Texas seems to make such a huge deal out of it, and other states don't. They're like, oh, here's your license, have fun. In Texas, like, no, we're going to rent out this event center, and we'll have food, and like this 3-hour-long presentation, and it's a lot of fun. So, side note, we actually do need volunteers for the upcoming swearing-in ceremony in December. Diane, I don't know if you have the details, if they have to be CPAs in order to volunteer as ushers. I don't know if you have any of the detail on that. She might have stepped away. But I'll reach out to her and get that question answered. If anyone's interested, it's a lot of fun. You get to meet a lot of people. It's great for kind of networking, meeting people. I always love seeing because people will come in from all over the state. And I love, people that I went to school with, or, maybe that I work with. I was, I'm based in Austin, work with some out of Dallas, and seeing them actually fly down to actually get their certificate. It's such a neat event. Cool. With that, we have just a few minutes before we break out into our networking groups. But before that, any other last minute questions or thoughts from the panel? Excellent question, McKenna. That is correct. The state well, Kim, I think I'll let you take this one. So in Texas, yes, but you can take it outside of Texas and then ask to transition the scores over. Kim, you might be more familiar with that than I am.
Sure. So Texas is one of the more rigorous jurisdictions out of all 55 jurisdictions in which to get your license. That means that transitioning out of Texas is a lot easier than trying to transition from anywhere else into Texas. Enron happened here. Mm-hmm. We have to kind of, accommodate for that. So in Texas, all educational requirements must be shown as complete on official transcripts from an accredited university before you will be granted as eligible and able to sit for the exam. It's a best practice. I won't say you should. It's a best practice to pursue licensure in the state in which you intend to work. And that's because if you pursue licensure in Alaska, I have no idea what the Texas State Board is going to tell you have to do in order to transition your license from Alaska to Texas. Last time I looked at Alaska, I didn't even see a requirement for accounting hours. So I imagine they would ask you to do quite a bit. I know they would make you do the ethics course because, again, Enron happened here. So we're really, really, really big on ethics in Texas, and you have to take the specific Texas ethics course, both as a student and as a CPA. You'll have to do that. Is it every year?
2 years.
Every 2 years for the rest of your career. So that is correct, McKenna, that you do have to have all coursework shown as complete in order to pursue the Texas in order to pursue the license through the Texas State Board.
Yeah, one quick side note I'll just add. Frequently, if anyone ends up working for a larger firm, like a regional or a national firm, those firms will usually require you to be licensed in the state of wherever you're working. So just another thing to keep in mind. But if it's, I've talked to people where, maybe they went to school here, but they plan after school that they're going to move to, say, Seattle or something, then it might make sense to pursue licensure in Seattle to begin with if you know you're going to be actually living out there.
I would agree with that, Brian. And just to bounce off of that, because I know this is something we work closely with several firms in the area as well. And I know this is something that comes up. If you pursue licensure through another jurisdiction and then need to transfer it, and you knew you were going to start working in Texas all along, most employers are not going to reimburse you for those additional fees in order to go through what's called the reciprocity process or the reciprocal application. So that's something else that you all need to keep in mind. And then I do have one little thing that I was going to put in the chat before we split up, Brian, if you don't mind.
Sure, go for it.
We are doing a sweepstakes at Becker. The sweepstakes ends at the end of December. It's for a free Becker CPA exam review and a free Keurig with a Becker mug. So I'm putting the link for you to enter the sweepstakes if you're interested in the chat. And if you want to look at the official rules, you can just follow the link and find the official rules hyperlink there as well.
Perfect. Awesome. Yeah, definitely, apply to that. I mean, free Becker, I remember one time they gave away a review course. I was at an event in San Antonio. There was 100 students there. And, I think they actually gave away two subscriptions, and it was a madhouse. People were like clamoring to get signed up for that. So cool. We'll go ahead and we're going to go break out to our breakout rooms here in just a bit. But thank you all for attending. Kim, Mary, Julie, thank you very much for serving on the panel. Lots of great discussion. Lots of good questions. So really appreciate that from everyone.